Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Samachay. We are at the top of Samachay at the Mishnah. Let me share my screen and we can really get started. I'll note that we are in the seventh chapter of Masechet Sanhedrin, and we are dealing with the laws associated with the punishment of stoning. And so we're reviewing all of the sins that if you violate, then you will be subject to that punishment. And we're at a Mishnah, so it shall share the next one on the list. So let's share my screen and get started. So here we go. So the Mishnah is going to detail certain forms of sorcery. So Baal Ov, what is this thing called a Baal Ov? Somebody who engages in Ov. Ze pitom hamidaber mishechyo. This is a pitom. Rashi will help us understand what that means. That speaks through his armpit. Pitom, Rashi, top of the daf on Samachayim and Aleph. Shem hamachashev, it's the name of a kind of sorcery. Hamadaber mishechyo, where the person speaks from their armpit. Ma'ales hames min haaretz. They bring up the dead from the ground. Here it's not meant literally, but on some level, the spirit of the dead rise up from the ground. Umoshiv lo b'shechyo. And that presence of the dead somehow resides in the person's armpit, tachas rosav, underneath his arm, umidaber, and it speaks mishechi, from that armpit. So I don't know how to exactly pronounce the laz, the old French ayashla or something along those lines, but in any event, that is what the Baal Ov is. The Mishnah continues. V'yid'oni. What is the thing that is yid'oni? Zahmadaber b'fiv. That's somebody who speaks through his mouth. Now we all speak through our mouth. So what exactly does that mean? Again, Rashi helps us out. Third line in the Rashi, Yid'oni hamadaber b'fiv, that the Yid'oni speaks through his mouth. As the Gemara is going to explain, Chaya achat yesh shishma yidua. There is a wild animal that is called a yidua. Umachnis mimena etzem, and the practitioners of this kind of sorcery would take a bone from that animal, l'toch piv, and put it inside their mouth. Ha'etz v'ha'etzem medaber me'alav, and all of a sudden, magically, the bone would start speaking. So al yedei kshafim, through the sorcery. So those are the Ov and Yid'oni that are referenced in the Torah. So the next, what's the story about them? Hare elu beskila, as of course our Mishnah is telling us the different things that if you do, you're subject to skila. So this is one of those things that you're subject to skila. You're subject to stoning. Vanish albahem. But what if you are asking about them? Meaning, if you go to some practitioner of this, imagine sort of like the tarot card readers, right? So what's the story if you go to those tarot card readers? Ba'azhara, that's just a prohibition. And what does it mean by hanishal behem? That's Rashi on the third narrow line. Hanishal behem shiba v'shoa behem la'agilo davar ha'asid kigon shaul. That it's where you come and you ask them to tell you about the future. They ask you, there are people out there who try to predict the future, and that is not a Jewish manner. We don't try to predict the future. We try to change the future and affect the future. We try to make a difference in the future. If we hear what the future is, we're going to be limited by what we can do. But if we don't know what the future is, then the future is limitless. Okay, so that is our Mishnah. The Gemara now begins by differentiating or pointing out an inconsistency between our Mishnah, which listed both Ov and Yid'oni with respect to the being stoned. But when it comes to Kares, we're going to see that the Mishnah that lists all the different prohibitions that are going to subject one to Kares, there they only list ov and they don't list yidoni. So we're going to try to explain why that is. So that's the Gemara's first question. Maishna hacha dekadani bal ov v'yidoni umaishna gabi krisus dekatani bal ov v'shaire liyidoni. Why is it that over here we list them both, but over there, when it comes to the list of all the prohibitions that result in somebody subject to making somebody subject to kares, it lists ov, but it doesn't list yidoni. So our famous Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shlakish have a disagreement about what the explanation is for this. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Hol ushneim belav echad nemru, that the reason is that both of them were written in connection with one violation. What does that mean? Or what's the ramification of that? Bilav, so Rashi tells us we're now 3, 6, 9, 11 lines down in the Rashi in the narrow lines. Hoel ushneim bilav echad nemru, because both of them were said at one, with one negative prohibition. Bilav de al tifnu el ha'ovos ve'el hayidaonim. The prohibition is in one sentence, meaning it's all together. It's not said two different sentences, one on ov and one on yudonim, but rather it's one sentence that says you shall not turn to the ov or to the yudonim. So the im asa shnehem be'elam echad. So as a result, if in fact you were to not realize that it was prohibited, and you were to forget, and you would be unaware of what you were doing for the moment, and you would go to both of them in one time, einu chayav ela chatas achat. You would only be subject to one sin offering. And so that's what it means. The point is that although, because the whether or not you're subject to kares is in part what triggers the obligation to offer a sin offering, the fact that you would be subject to only one sin offering if you did both of them, that's why the Mishnah over there chose to only list one of them. Because the idea of that Mishnah is to tell you that if you were to have violated everything that's listed in the Mishnah, I think there are 40-something things that are listed in the Mishnah, you would be subject to, I guess there are 36 transactions subject to kares. So, and the point is that you violate them, you would be even in one moment of unawareness, you would be subject to 36 chataot. And so as a result, you have 36 sin offerings. But here, if they also listed yidoni, you would still be subject to 36 sin offerings, because you can't be subject to 2 sin offerings for ov and yidoni, because they are all part of one prohibition. So that is Rabbi Yochanan's explanation for why the Mishnah over there says ov but not yidoni. Really, the law applies to each of them. It's just you can't get 2 chatas offerings for doing both of them in one session of unawareness. So Reish Lakish says no. Yidoni lefisha ein bo ma'isa. No, the issue is that we only get kares for a sin that involves some sort of action, and yidoni doesn't have an action associated with it. And Rashi explains. Take a look at Rashi. It's now 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 lines up in the narrowest lines of Rashi. Reish Lakish Amar Yidoni Lahachi Lo Tanina La. This is why it wasn't learned over there, Lahasam, over there. Mishum da Afilu Ki Avidla. Even if you did do it, but Ape Nafshe, on its own, Lav Bar Karbanhu, you would not be subject to a sin offering. Lefisha Ein Bo Maisa, because there's no action. So although you might actually be subject to kares, the point is that this Mishnah of listing all those kares situations is to highlight that there's a chatas associated with it, but there's no chatas associated with this one, because the chatas eino ba elam al hamasa, and because a sin offering only comes through action. Diksiv, because the pasuk says, "Is Vayikra Perek Dalet pasuk Kav Zayin va'aseh achat." If you did one of these things, so then you're going to be subject to a sin offering. Implication is you have to do something. Aval Baal Ov Sarach Lahakish. But why is it that a Baal Ov is considered doing something? He needs to flap his arms in order to create some sort of spirit, movement in order to have the armpit speak. It's sort of like moving the lips. Kilakaman, as we're going to explain. And that waving of the arm is considered an action. But what do? You take this bone and you put it in your mouth. While you're taking the bone and you're putting it in the mouth, you have not actually done the Yid'oni thing. The Yid'oni thing only takes effect when the bone starts speaking. But when the bone starts speaking, your mouth isn't moving. You're not doing anything. The bone is doing all the work. Once it's in your mouth, so then the bone starts speaking on its own. So there is no action here. Okay. So
according to Rav Yochanan, what is the time period? Is it toch kedei dibur? I mean, if he does Yidoni now and 10 minutes later, maybe that would be a second chatat.
So it's all, we use the term ha'elam echad, one moment of unawareness. So the point is that the question is, did he become aware that it was prohibited between the two? Even if it was 2 days later, if he was just, wasn't thinking about it, he was very distracted, and as a result, he did one, and then a couple days later, he did the other, but he never realized in between that the action that he did was actually prohibited. So then that's all going to be subject to one korban, according to Rabbi Yochanan, because it's all one lack of knowledge.
Now, is there a time frame? 2 years?
No,
6?
As long as you don't realize that it's prohibited, that's one moment of unawareness. It can be, I'm not aware of any time limit on that. But
so
we haven't
once he becomes aware of it, then the second one would never be a moment of unawareness, because he now knows, even if he did it.
No, that's so not true. Have you never turned on a light on Shabbos? Of course, I've turned on a light on Shabbos. I try. I'm not proud of it, but I've turned on a light on Shabbos. I forget. You forgot. The guy thinks that he knows that it's prohibited, and then he goes and says, "Oh, he hears his friend, Chris." His neighbor Chris is going to this exciting show, and he says, "Oh, I'll go too." And they teach them, and the show is all about how you do Yidoni, and he's not focused on it at the moment, and so he learns how to do Yidoni, and he sticks the bone in his mouth, and all of a sudden he's done the action. So yeah, 100%, it can absolutely happen that you don't realize that that you're not paying attention to what you're doing, and so as a result, you engage in the behavior. Even though you did know about it, of course, on some level, you knew about it, but then you realize, you did it and without remembering that, oh, that's exactly, you may remember, I know that there's a Yidoni thing, but I don't remember the exact details, and I don't think this is it. And so as a result, you do it. That 100% it can happen. That's the whole point. That's the meaning of ha'olam, is that you did know about it, because we assume that people start by knowing about it, but you forgot. Again, like happens on Shabbos if you turn on the light. So the Gemara is now going to try to understand, why does Rabbi Yochanan say what he says and not what Reish Lakish says, and vice versa. So for Rabbi Yochanan, Ma'ishna Bal Ov did not. Why did we specifically mention Ov? After all, Ov and Yidoni are identical, but so why mention only Ov and not Yidoni? So Mishum de Pasuk Beikra, because that's how the Torah begins. The Torah begins with the reference to Ov. Of Reish Lakish, my time alo Amar Rabbi Yochanan. What's wrong with Rabbi Yochanan's answer? Why doesn't Reish Lakish agree with it? So Amar Rav Papa, Chalukin Hein B'Misa. Now the point is that because the Torah separately indicates a death penalty for each of them, and the separation is because the word O is used. Let's take a look in the first of the wide lines in Rashi. Chalukin Hein B'Misa. Kishaperish skilasan, when the Torah tells us about the skila that they get, chalkan hakatu, the pasuk divides them, and what does the pasuk say? Ki yebahen ov o yidoni mot yumatu. That if you do ov or yidoni, so then you should definitely die. Be'evan yergemu otam demeyem bam. that they should be stoned and their blood is on them. So veloksiv viyidoni. It doesn't say ov viyidoni. Ov viyidoni would also mean or, because the letter vav can be or as well as and. And so as a result, the fact that it went out of its way and said ov o yidoni, hilkach ihava yidoni bar karban hava mechayev aleha. So if in fact Yudoni would be subject to a karban, you would be chayev on it. Nami ki avid le v'hadi ov. It's separate from ov, and so as a result, based on that, Reish Lakish disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan and says, actually, if in one moment of unawareness you do both ov and yidoni, you are subject to two karbanot. So that's why he can't agree with Rabbi Yochanan's answer. Rabbi Yochanan chaluka delav shma chaluka. No, a separation in connection. I'm sorry, chaluka delav shma chaluka. The separation when it comes to the prohibition is considered a separation. Demisa lo shma chaluka. But the fact that you have some kind of separation in Misa, that doesn't mean that you would be subject to two karbanot. And so as a result, he disagrees fundamentally with Reish Lakish's learning of that pasuk. Rabbi Yochanan, my time alo Amar Reish Lakish. So on some level, that already explains why he doesn't learn with like Reish Lakish, because he doesn't agree that it's subject to one, and he can hold his position. But nonetheless, the Gemara wants to understand: is there something else that's going on that he doesn't agree with Reish Lakish's approach? That says again, Reish Lakish says that Yidoni is different and not subject to a chatas because there's no action. So, meaning, and doesn't Rabbi Yochanan agree that it's not an action? Amar lach masniks and decreases Rabbi Akiva. No, the problem is that the Mishnah in Krisos is according to Rabbi Akiva. To Amar lo be'inan ma'isa, and Rabbi Akiva is the one who says you don't need to take an action in order to be subject to a chatas. V'reish lakish nehi delo boy Rabbi Akiva ma'asa rabba ma'isa zuta boy. And Reish Lakish says, yes, you are absolutely right, Rabbi Yochanan, that Mishnah over there in Krisos that lists 36 different kinds of sins that you can get kares says is by Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva says you don't need an ordinary action. But Rabbi Akiva actually says, according to Reish Lakish, that you don't need a major action. You do need to at least have some minor action. And so as a result, when Yidoni, which involves no action at all, is at play, so as a result, you would not be subject to a chatas offering, even according to Rabbi Akiva. So, Megadef, my Masa Isha. So now we're going to ask with respect to two other things for which there is liability. What is the action? Meaning, why are they subject to a sin offering? So my Maisa Ika, what is the action in connection with a blasphemy? So Akimas Vasav Havimasa. Now the moving of the lips, that's considered an action. Baal Ov, what about the Baal Ov? Well, we already answered that with Rashi. My Maisa Ika, what's the action? Hakashas Rosab, the flapping, the clapping of your arm against your body, that constitutes the action. So Vafil Rabbanan. 1 second. So Rashi helps us understand what this means. Afil Rabbanan, fifth wide line towards the end of the line. Vafil Rabbanan, Ka'amar Reish Lakish, Dahava Masa Bitmia. Would, according to Reish Lakish, would the rabbis also say that this flapping of the arms constitutes an action? Kolomar, Medelo Pligi Rabbanan Aleha Hasam. After all, the rabbis don't disagree with Rabbi Akiva over there with respect to the listing of what is subject to a sin offering, Ela b'megadev, only with respect to the blasphemy, where Rabbi Akiva says you're subject, and the rabbis say you're not. Aval b'Baal Ov, when it comes to the Baal Ov who does the flapping of the arms, Modu, the rabbis agree that you are subject to a sin offering. Alma hakashas rosav de Baal Ov havi maseh. But that implies that the waving of the arms, according to, it would seem, according to the rabbis, would constitute some kind of action. But that seems to be inconsistent with the rabbi's position elsewhere, because Vahatanya, we have a brisa back into the Gemara. We are now smack in the middle of the daf. The beginning of that line has a dalet on it. Third word on the line. Vatanya eino chayev ella adavar sheyesh bo ma'aseh. Where you're only subject to a sin offering if you have an action that takes if you do something that requires an action. Kagon zibuach, like slaughtering, kitur, burning, nisuch, libation. So v'hashtachava, and bowing down. V'amar Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish says, Man Tana Hishtachava, who is the Tana of this brisa that refers to bowing down as an action? Rabbi Akiva, it's Rabbi Akiva, to Amr Lo Bein and Maisa, because Rabbi Akiva is the one who says that you don't require an action. And according to what we just heard from Reish Lakish, that means that Rabbi Akiva thinks that a bowing down is a minor action, whereas the rabbis would say bowing down is not an action at all. And so as a result, that's why Rabbi Akiva, so how can Rabbi Akiva say that the rabbis, how does how does Reish Lakish understand why the rabbis don't disagree other than in connection with blasphemy? They only disagree about blasphemy. Why don't they also disagree about bowing down? The Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, afilu temer rabbanan, kfifas komaso the rabbanan havi maisa. That according to Rabbi Yochanan, everything's fine, because according to the Rabbi Yochanan, bowing is considered an action. So it can't be that bowing or flapping one's arms would be considered an action. So hashta l'reish lakish kvivas komasol l'rabbanan lo havi maisa hakashas roasav deval ov havi maisa. So how could it be that according to Reish Lakish, bending your body to bow down is not considered an action according to the rabbis, whereas waving your arms is considered an action? So Kika Amar Reish Lakish Nami Rabbi Akiva Alal Rabbanan Lo. So maybe Reish Lakish is really explaining the view according to Rabbi Akiva, and it isn't necessarily the view according to the rabbis. One second. Why are the rabbis only arguing in connection with blasphemy? They should also be arguing about ov as well. And so as a result, how can you explain this? So as a result, we now offer a different answer to our question of what is the action for a practitioner of ov. It is not the clapping of the arm, as Reish Lakish, as we had originally said, because that doesn't work according to Reish Lakish. Now, it works according to Rabbi Yochanan, but it doesn't work according to Reish Lakish. So we need to offer a new answer, and Ula comes to the rescue. Now, Ula's answer also is going to be rejected, but we're going to see that a modification of it by Rava is going to save our day. So Ella Amar Ula b'mekater l'shade. Now, we're talking about how do you engage in the ov action? You initially burn incense to a demon, and that causes the soul of the person to come out of the ground and go into your armpit, and now you can flap your arms, and that would be or do whatever you need to do, and the armpit will speak from as if from the grave. So that's a problem. Amrle Rava says to Ula, Mekater l'shade oved avodos kochavimhu. Once you do that, you're worshiping an idol. We're not allowed to worship the demons. So Ela Rava. So Rava says, you almost got it, Ula, but let me share. The Mekater lechaber, that what you're doing is you're burning incense in order to get the soul up, in order to bring the soul to you. And so that's the action that constitutes the action. So Amr le Abaye hamakater lechaber chover chaverhu. Well, 1 second. If what you're saying is that you're burning incense to gather something in a magical means, that is considered conjuring. And conjuring is its own separate prohibition. In Dvarim, Perik Yud Chet, Pasuk Yud and Yud Aleph, the Pasuk Yud says Lo Yimitzevecha, and Pasuk Yud Aleph refers to V'chover Chaver, to try somebody who's conjuring a group of something. And so as a result, that's subject to a negative prohibition. That's not subject to kares, but it's subject to lashes. So Rava responds, yes, you're absolutely right. That if it weren't for the fact that you're doing it for ov, you would be subject to lashes. But Torah Amra chover zeh the skila, that ov is so bad. So if you're conjuring animals or creatures or whatever, so then you're just subject to lashes. But if you try to conjure dead spirits into your own armpits, so then that's going to constitute something that is subject to stoning. So Tana Rabbanan, we now, since we mentioned Chover Chaver, we're going to teach a lesson associated with it. Chover, a brisa. Chover Chaver, what is this conjuring of conjuries? Of a group of something. Echad Chaver Gadol, doesn't make a difference whether it's big. The Echad Chaver Katan, doesn't make a difference whether it's small. And even if you mix creatures, so you even get a snake and a scorpion. Amar Abaye, Hilkach Haimai did summit Zibura va'akraba. And so if you try to bring together a bee and a scorpion, Av al Gav to come kavin delo lazku, that even though your intention in using this magic, a sorcery, in order to try and get the bee and the scorpion together is so that they would sting one another and they would kill each other and they would die, that it's still, and so that people would be protected, it's forbidden. Let's take a look at Rashi. Third line from the bottom, Rashi offers two explanations. So that they injure each other. Midbar, or you're trying to get them to go to the wilderness. So they aren't found in settlement and therefore cause damage. So as a result, that's going to be prohibited. The Rabbi Yochanan, Maishna de Kefifas Komasola Rabbanan having Maisa, Vakimas Fasab lo having Maisa. So in second, why is it that when it comes to blasphemy, the rabbis disagree and say that moving the lips is not sufficient action, but when it comes to bowing down, that is considered a sufficient action according to the rabbis, according to Rabbi Yochanan? So Rava explains, Shiny Megadiv ho v'yeshno b'lev. You have to understand, what exactly is the prohibition of blasphemy? It isn't the words coming out of your mouth. It is the intention behind those words. And so as a result, it's what's in the heart. And Rashi goes really to a remarkable degree. Ho v'yeshno b'lev, second to last line, last Rashi on Samachei Amud Aleph. Ikar chiyuv haba alav talui b'lev. The key aspect of the liability in this case of somebody who engages in blasphemy is what's happening in the heart. Shemitchaven levarech Hashem, that the intention is to quote unquote bless God. Shafilu mevarech as Hashem kol hayom, that one who could bless God all day, ve'ein belibo klape mala, and he has no intention to towards God whatsoever. Ela shahala es Hashem ledavar acher umikanehu b'shem hamiyuchad. He just happened to choose that this table he was referring to by God's name. And so as a result, even though he was really just cursing this terrible table, I can't believe this table fell down or whatever, and I think it's terrible, terrible, terrible. But he was using God's name because that's how he called the table. No. And so as a result, even if he spent all day doing that, somebody who does that is not going to be liable for any violation, because what matters is what's in the heart.
The intent.
Exactly. The intent matters in this unique situation when it comes to blasphemy. All right. So that brings us to the next question. And so, which asks, all right, I now understand why blasphemy is treated differently. But what about Masiv Rav Zera? She'ein behen yotzu edim zomamin, she'ein behen maisa. Another situation where we don't have a sin offering is when it comes to false witnesses who say who testify falsely, and then they get the people say, another set of witnesses come and say, you couldn't have testified to that because you were with us at that time. So as a result, when in that situation, we say that even if they had no knowledge of the fact that it was prohibited, they are not going to be subject to a sin offering. V'amai, that isn't about what's in the heart. That's about what they comes out of their mouth. Amarava, shiny Adim Zoman, Ho Vayeshna B'Kol. No, it's not the movement of the lips that matter, it's just the voice. The Kol Rabbi Yochanan, Lav Maisahu. Well, 1 second. Making a noise is not considered an action according to Rabbi Yochanan. V'ha Idmar, we have a ruling, Chasama B'Kol. If you try to prevent an animal from eating while it's working, exactly, which you're not allowed to do, because if it's working for you, you have to allow it to do some of the eating. So then you violate, even if the only way you muzzled it is not by putting anything physical on the animal, but rather you, every time it's about to bite something, you go, yeah, hey, stop.
Or you pulled him
Right.
back.
Yeah, or yeah, well, no, if you pull him back, so then you've actually done an action. The
Correct,
point
yes.
is we're trying to say, even if you just use your mouth,
Right.
Stop that, you say. And of course the animal listens because it recognizes anger in your voice. So as a result, and similar, behen iga bakol. And if you lead animals, and Rashi tells us that this is talking about where you lead two different animals that are yoked together, so that would be kolayim. So the first one is not muzzling your animal, and the second one is kolayim. In both cases, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayev, V'Reish Lakish Amar Pater. Rabbi Yochanan says you're Chayev. Making the noise is a sufficient action. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayev Akimas Piv having Maisa. Reb Shlogosh Amar Pater Akimas Piv lo having Maisa. And it's consistent with everything we've seen, because Reb Yochanan seems to say that moving your mouth matters and it's considered an action. And Reb Shlogosh says, no, it's not considered an action, at least according to the rabbis. So Ella Amar Rava explains, okay, here's another answer. Shiny Adim Zomimin Hoel Vayeshnan Biriya. That what they really did is seeing. And what does Rashi tell us? Biriya, Iker Chiyuva. This is 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 12, about 15 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Samachei Amabet. Iker Chiyuva, the main aspect of why they're liable, Ba al Yedei Hariya, comes because of what they saw. Now, in this case, it's really what they didn't see, right? It's what they made up. Shemeidim Shirou Shaviriya Leis Bamaisa. Seeing is not considered an action. Okay, so in that situation, so seeing is not an action, so that's one possibility. Now, many Rishonim are very confused by this, because of course they didn't see anything. So the Rif, as is noted in the Mesoras Hashas, if you take a look in the Mesoras Hashas, hey, at the top of the top left corner of the daf, it says the Rav Alphys Reish Ayin Gimel Kasa b'shem Rav Hai, that in the name of Rav Haigon, Girsato, that his girsa was Hoel v'yeshnan be'aya, aya, that instead of re'iyah, take out the letter reish, and it's be'aya. And in that situation, what it means is, if you think about it, if you say I in at least English, right, it means yes. So too it was apparently then, that basically you could say Aya. And if you think about it, you don't have to move. That can all come from a guttural perspective. It doesn't have to, you don't have to require any movement. And yet you can say yes. And so as a result, there's a way to say yes with no movement of your body. And so as a result, that's no apparent movement of your body. And so as a result, that's what it means when Rava is giving his second answer. So those are two possible explanations, but in any event, the bottom line is that Adim Zomim are not subject to a sin offering because of the lack of action associated with them. Okay, so Now, the Gemara is going to quote a Baraisa that describes Ov and Yidoni. Tanu Rabbanan. Baal Ov, Zeh HaMedaber Bein HaPrakim. This is one who speaks from the joints, Bein Atzilo Yadav, and or from his armpits. Yidoni, what's a Yidoni? Zeh HaManiach Etzem Yadua Befiv. He puts a bone of a Yadua animal in his mouth, and the bone speaks by itself. Meisvei, I'm going to ask you a question. That 1 second, when your voice shall be like that ov from the ground. So 1 second, that's a pasuk in Yeshayahu, and it seems like the ov is making a noise from the ground. My lab demishtoi kaorche, that it's working in the normal way. Ki orche, Rashi tells us about 20 lines down in the Rashi. Mitoch kivro, that the idea is that maybe an ov actually has the spirit speak from the grave. Umitoch kach kol namuch. And then as a result, it's a low voice. And that's what it's trying to highlight, that your voice shall be like that of an O from the ground, meaning that it's a low voice. That's what the pasuk is trying to tell us. Lo, the salik v'yaseh ben haprakim umishtai. No, it goes up and then it goes within the joints. The point is that that's where it comes from. The ov spirit comes from there, not that the sound comes from there. Tashma, we'll try again to say that ov doesn't mean a voice from the armpit, but rather from the ground. But Tomer Ha'isha El Shaul, Elokim Ra'iti Olim Min Haaretz. I see some kind of angel of God rising up from the land. This is the spirit of Shmuel the Navi. This is when Shaul asked about what his future was going to be. So he went to a Balat Ov. And so my love, the Mishtoe Kiorche. So again, doesn't that show that it was coming from the ground? Again, lo, the Yosef ben Aprakim Mishtoe. No, the point is that it was coming from the ground. The spirit was coming from the ground, not the sound was coming from the ground. And so as a result, the Ov means as we've explained. Tan Rabbanan Baal Ov, again another brisa. Abal Ov, Echad Hamala B'Zchuro, Echad Hanishal B'Gulgolas. It doesn't make a difference. You could raise up that spirit into your manhood, the Echad Hanishal B'Gulgolas, or you could see a skull on the ground and consult that. Ma Bein Zelazeh, what's the difference between these two examples? So Mala B'Zchuro, if you try to bring it up and have it speak from your male member, so Eino Ella Ola Kedarko. Well, then when the spirit comes up, it's not going to go up in the normal way. And Rashi says that what it means is that you might think, often we see in the horror movies, when some creature comes out of the grave, it comes out head first. This is telling us that no, when the spirit comes out, it comes out feet first. So it's not as if it's clawing its way out, it's as if it's being dragged out. Ve'eno ola b'Shabbos, and it won't come out on Shabbos. But nishal b'Gulgolas, if you're consulting a skull of the deceased, well then ola kedarka, then everything comes up naturally. Essentially the head comes into the skull. Ve'ola b'Shabbos, and it can even happen on Shabbos. Ola, 1 second. Does it really go up? The skull's on the ground. It doesn't need to go up. So hakame manach, it's lying in front of the person. So ela ema ona kedarko. Now what it means is that it answers. The point is that it goes up and it answers, and it doesn't actually go to the armpit. It's just going to go to this skull. V'ona b'Shabbos, and since it's not going into the armpit, it's just going to this skull. It can even answer on Shabbos. V'av she'ela zu, and this issue, Sha'al Turnus Rufus as Rabbi Akiva. We're going to see in the conversation that we're now going to quote between Turnus Rufus and Rabbi Akiva that this topic actually came up. That the point is that when it comes to the question of whether or not a voice will come up on Shabbos, that's going to be an element of this conversation. Because what happened? Amar lo, Turnus Rufus asked Rabbi Akiva, Umay yom miyomayim. How is today different from every other day? This is not about Pesach, but about Shabbos. So Amar lo, Rabbi Akiva says, Uma gvar gut miguvrin. What's the difference between you and every other person? Because he knows what he's going to answer, right? Rabbi Turnus Rufus responds, Amar le demari tzave, right? My master, the king, the Caesar, appointed me, and that's why I am who I am. So Shabbos, so Rabbi Akiva responds back, Shabbos nami, demari tzave, Hashem chose Shabbos. So Amar le, you're misunderstanding my point. I'm asking you the following. Mi yemar da'ina Shabbos. How do I know that what we call Shabbos is Shabbos? Maybe we got confused over time and the days are different. So Amar lo nahar sabat yom nuchia. Now, there are a lot of proofs, and we're going to bring three of them, and one of them is the fact that the spirits won't come up. So proof number one is the river Sabachon shows that it's not true, and because Rashi tells us that this is about opposite the maybe two lines up from the last narrow line in the Gemara, right opposite that on the left-hand side of the page. Nar Sabachon Yochiach. Nar Echad Shalavanim. It's a rocky river. Ubechol Yemot HaShabbos, and every day of the week, Shutaf V'holach. It's a raging river. Ubiyom HaShabbos Shoket V'nach. But on Shabbos, it's nice, it's calm. And so as a result, that shows which day is Shabbos. Second proof, Baal Ov Yochiach. If you go to a Baal Ov and try to get him to bring a spirit up on Shabbos, if he's a real Baal Ov and not just a trickster, he can't do it. And Kivro Shel Aviv Yochiach. And moreover, the grave of your father proves it. She'ein Mala Asham b'Shabbos. Because it does not have smoke on Shabbos. As Rashi says, right opposite the first wide line in the Gemara, Kivro Shel Aviv, the Turnus Rufus, that when it came to the grave of the father of Turnus Rufus, Kol Yamos Shabbos, every day of the week, Hayamala Ashan, smoke would come up because he was such an evil person, the father of Turnus Rufus. Shahaya Nidon, the Nisraf, because he was burning and he was being judged and burned. Ubishabbos, but on Shabbos, Poshe Gehenim b'Shovtan. But on Shabbos, even those who are subject to the terrible impact of hell, they have a reprieve on Shabbos. And so as a result, there's no smoke coming up from your father's grave. So Amar Lo, Turnus Rufus says, busy so, 1 second, you've disgraced my father. Biyashto, you embarrassed him. V'kilalto, and you insulted him. All right, in any event. So that the bottom line is that's the story. And so the point is that we see that the fact that Ov doesn't work on Shabbos supports what we just said before, that Ov doesn't work on Shabbos. Okay. So now the Gemara is going to analyze the following verse. The verse Parak Yud Chet in Dvarim, Pasuk Yud and Yud Aleph. Pasuk Yud tells us you're not allowed to do these things, and Yud Aleph has the list of the items that are listed. And what are the listed? Shoel Ov, Hainu V'Dorish El Amesim. But what we've just described is somebody who does Ov seems to be the same as somebody who seeks out the dead. So what's the difference between the two that the Torah would separately list them? So Dorish Lamesim Kedatanya, one who seeks out the dead, is the following. The Dorish El Hamesim. Look at this brisa. What is the meaning of seeking out the dead? Zeh Hamariv Atzmo V'Holech Vilan Beves HaKvaros. This refers to one who starves himself and sleeps in the cemetery. Kadesha Tishra Alav Ruach Tuma. This is one who sleeps in the dead there in order to get that impure spirit. Uvikishahaya Rabbi Akiva Magia Lemikrazeh. When Rabbi Akiva would Rabbi Akiva would reach this verse, the brisa continues, Hayaboche, he would cry, Uma hamar ivatzmo kidei shetishra alav ruach tuma, shora alav ruach tuma. When somebody wants to starve himself and become impure and have a spirit rest upon him, he ends up being successful. He gets that spirit. But Hamarav Atzmo Kadesha Tishra Alav Ruach Tahara. But when we want to starve ourselves in order to try and work our darndest in order to have the spirit of Hashem rest upon us, Alachas Kama Kama, we should even be more successful. Aval Ma'aseh, but what can we do? Sha'avonoseinu Garmu Lanu, that our sins have caused us that we aren't successful in this effort. Shene'amar. Ki im avonosechem, that your sins, hayu mavdilin beinechem uvein elokechem, that's what's separating you between you and your God, and because of our sins, we don't have this success, and that was why Rabbi Akiva was sad. Amar Rava ibo tzadike baru alma, that another way to understand this verse of Ki im avonosechem hayu mavdilin beinechem levein elokechem is that when the righteous want, they can create a world. Meaning, this is a golem story Gemara. Shenemar Ki im avonosechem hayu mavdilin, as we cite this pasuk, for only your sins have separated between you. Meaning that a righteous person who doesn't have sins is able to do things like Hashem. Rava bara gavra, so Rava created a person. Shadre lekamei de Rabbi Zera, and sent it before Rabbi Zera. Hava kamishtai bahade. Rabbi Zera was speaking to it. V'lo hava kamahaderle, but the golem couldn't answer because the golem doesn't have the ability to talk. Only Hashem has that ability to give the ability to talk. So Amrle, so the Rabbi Zera said, Mi chavra at, are you really one of our colleagues? Hadar la'afrayach, go back to the dust. Rav Chanina v'Rav Oshia havu yasve kamal kol male Shabbos. So Rav Chanina and Rav Oshia would sit together every Erev Shabbos v'askim b'sefer Yitzira, and they would delve into the book of creation. Umibru lahu igla tilsa, and they would bring up forth a calf that was 1/3 of its maturity, which is supposedly the best and tastiest kind of meat. And then they would have that for Shabbos. Tanu Rabbanan, another brisa in connection with sorcery. Me'onein, when it comes to a me'onein, what is that? Rabbi Shimon Omer zehamavir shiva mine zachor al ha'ayin. This is one who takes 7 different kinds of semen and puts it in front of their eyes. Chachamim omrim, and again tries to do magic with that. Chachamim say no. This is one who grabs the eyes, meaning that they create illusions, they do magic. Rabbi Akiva Omer, itim v'shos. No, this is somebody who knows the different times for things. V'omer, hayom yafal etzeis. This is a good day to go out on a trip. L'machar yafal likach. Tomorrow is a good day for business. Limude arve shvius chitin yafos. That the stalks or the grains of the year before the Shemitah year is going to have good wheat, meaning again all superstitions. Ikre kitnios mios ros, that if you uproot legumes, that prevents them from spoiling. So Tanurabanan, and now another brisa, menachesh, somebody who predicts the future. Ze omer pito nafla mipiv. This is somebody who says, oh, a piece of bread fell from the mouth. That's going to mean the following. Maklo nafla miyado. Oh, his staff fell from his hand. Better be careful. V'no kore lo miacharav. Oh, his son called him from behind him. Oriv korivlo. Oh, the raven was calling to him. Tzvi hefsiko b'derech. A deer crossed his path. You can imagine some other examples, a black cat, etc. Nakash mimino ushuol mismolo. There was a snake on his right or a fox on his left. So as we turn to Samach Vav Amud Aleph, so Al Tiatchiel B. Don't start with me because I don't want to be first. Shachris who? It's the morning. Morning's not a good time for this. Rosh Chodesh who? It's the first of the month. That's not a good time for this. Motzei Shabbos who? It's right after Shabbos. It's the beginning of the week. That's not a good time for this. All of those kind of omens and that kind of thinking, all usser. We should not be using that. We have to try to avoid that kind of thinking. Tanarabanan lo senachashu v'lo se'onenu. So what does it mean that you can't predict the future and you should, or try to predict the future and you shouldn't calculate times? Kagon elu hamanachashim. It's these kinds who use the following. Bechulda, they look at a weasel. Be'ofot, they look at the birds. Uvidagim, or they look at the fish. All those kinds of things, those kinds of efforts to predict the future, all not allowed, not what we want from the Jewish people, because again, we are in control. Suggesting that something can predict the future takes the control of the future out of our hands, and that is not true. We have control over the future. We determine the next moment of our actions. We determine what we do, and that is so crucial to what it means to be a Jew. And so as a result, we'll pick up with the next Mishnah, which continues our discussion of the prohibitions that are punishable with stoning. So to see what we're going to learn next, either stay tuned for tomorrow or read the next 3 words of the Mishnah, and you'll see what comes next. Have a great day. Looking forward to continuing our learning tomorrow. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Yeah, don't try. No, it's 100%. Random walk down Wall Street. You have to be careful. You can use, historical data to try to understand what's happening. But exactly. You got to be careful. 100%. Have a great day, everybody.